Aloha, I'm Evan Leong from Brain Gain Hawaii, and welcome to today's Safe Hawaii Jobs and Business webinar for April 21, 2020. If this is still fairly new for you, we have a resource folder with updated memos explaining the details of the PPP and loan forgiveness. So please make sure you review those documents before asking questions, since a lot of the answers are in those documents. Buddy will post the links in the chat box. We have previous webinar videos and a podcast, and Buddy will post those links as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our team for today, and we can get into this. Jane Sawyer is the district director for the Hawaii SBA and is our champion for Hawaii small businesses. We have Darren Leong from the law office of Darren R. Leong, who's a specialist in employment law. Stacy Katakura is the CEO of the Cumulus, which is the outsourced CFO and accounting firm here in Honolulu. We have Jeff Harris, who's a senior named partner at the law firm of Torkelson and Katz, Hetherington, Harris, and Kenorick. Buddy Leong is in the background. He's an analyst here at Brain Gain Hawaii, handling our communications, the email list, updates, Google Drive, and more. He's also running the chat box and the Q&A. And Coco Leong is our editor here at Brain Gain Hawaii, in charge of our content and the video. He's also in charge of the podcast and the YouTube channel. So questions, we're going to take them in the Q&A chat box only. That's the button at the bottom of the Zoom window. If you post it in the chat box, it won't be answered, and Buddy will ask you to post it in the chat box, so please post it in the chat box. You can also upvote the questions in the Q&A box if they pertain to you as well, and we're going to try something new today in the latter part of the webinar to answer those upvoted questions live, okay? For unanswered questions, you can email them to us at questions@braingainhi.com, but only for the last, for 30 minutes after this webinar is done, because the load is too big. It's too hard to get to all of it, okay? And lastly, this is a fully volunteer effort. No one's being paid here. We're working for free. It's pro bono. We're just trying to help out Hawaii employers save jobs in their own businesses. We've put in hundreds of hours and personally answered over hundreds of questions. So if you're getting value from this, we'd love to hear about it. That's what helps keep us going. So before any further ado, sorry about that, let's start with Jane Sawyer from Hawaii's SBA. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As we're sitting here talking about COVID-19 response and how we're going to help small businesses and employees get through this. So top of the news today is we're looking at another round of funding for the PPP and EIDL small business loan programs through the SBA and your local financial institutions. Now, it looks like it's largely a lot of the same criteria. We hope one thing we'll see is maybe some improved efficiency to get your loan applications processed and through your banks into the system quickly and getting a response to you much faster than we've been able to. Again, your patience is appreciated because this is such an unprecedented high volume effort across the country. But with folks like the experts on today's webinar, you're getting a lot of good advice to make it a little bit easier to cross the finish line, get some funding, and hopefully position your business, your small business, for better survival as we come out of this and go forward. Again, we're expecting that we're going to see some fast action from Congress, and hopefully we'll have information by the end of the week about opening up the spigot for more financial assistance to small businesses. The bill that they're considering, or is coming out of the Senate right now, puts another $310 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program loans at SBA. And again, these will still have the same features previously, open to all small businesses with under 500 employees. And it can go up to $10 million. You have a 2-year repay if the funds are not awarded forgiveness. So you apply through local banks and participating lenders, fintechs, people that will be able to help you get your loan processed, approved as quickly as possible. But the key feature of this remains getting your employees on the payroll. So that's the key feature. You need to think about that, plan for that. Even if you may be a small business who's already submitted your application and didn't get funded in round one, we recommend you contact your lender, the bank where you submitted it, see if the application is good, check your inbox for your email in case they have sent you some type of notification about your status, the status of your application. So check on that, check with your bank, and then with some of the comments you'll hear today, you may want to adjust your strategies, but the banks, again, are committed to working as quickly as possible to push these through and make sure we get the dollars to Hawaii-based small businesses. The economic injury disaster loan looks like it's going to take on some more funding with this round of legislation, with this update for the act, for both the advanced portion and the economic injury disaster loans themselves. This queue also slowed down. Remember, if you've got a number, either with a, hopefully with a, beginning with a 3, that means you're in queue and your loan is being processed. We're seeing that they're kicking out some more of these advances up to $10,000, and you should get that money into your account and also a notification in your inbox regarding the status of your loan. Again, they're backed up pretty strongly still, so we recommend that you send them an email and give them a little bit of time to respond if you have questions about the status of an economic injury disaster loan as well. The SBA debt relief is still available for now till the next 6 months. If you have a current SBA loan and you haven't gotten notified from your banker about SBA making payments for you, check with your bank, or if it's a disaster loan, call the disaster office and maybe the last loan servicing person that you spoke with there to see about how to get that loan deferred and help you manage your cash a little bit more easily. I think that's probably a quick enough update here from my side, and let's get on with how we deal with the details. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Jane. Hello, everyone. So for Q&As, just so we can see what are the most pressing questions, there in the Q&A box, there's a little thumbs up, so you can vote up questions, and we'll take a look at those there. And once we hit all of the items that we had pre-planned, then we will just be taking those Q&As with the ones that are the most voted up. Like we did the last time, I'd like to address those of you out there who submitted PPP applications but did not get funded in the first round. So first, some additional statistics that have been published in the past few days. I discussed some of those statistics in the Friday webinar. Bank of Hawaii, in I think the Star Advertiser reported that it had approved 2,100 loans for a total of $525 million of the $2 billion that Hawaii got. What that breaks down to is an average loan size of $250,000. The state of Hawaii, the average loan size appears to be in the range of about 174,000. So Bank of Hawaii's average loan size is significantly above the average. First Hawaiian Bank published, or at least was in news sources, as having a total of $800 million of the $2 billion, which would be the highest bank in total dollar amount. We are unable to calculate their loan size because we don't have their numbers on how many were approved. If, however, their number of approved loans are in a similar range to some of the other banks, because Bank of Hawaii, again, was 2,100, and ASB, or American Savings Bank, was 2,500, then First Hawaiian Bank would have a very high average loan size. We raise these stats really to get to what we think is the most pressing question for you, which is, if I submit a PPP application, where's the fastest place that I can get that application approved? And anecdotally, you know, we've received quite a few emails of applications that were submitted in the first day or two, the April 3rd, April 4th, April 5th, that weren't funded. Unfortunately, we can only sort of piece some of this together, but I guess I would say, to the extent that some of the banks out there reopen their their portals sometime in the near future before the next round, then you may want to consider putting an application in there, even if you put one in very early at another one of the banks. Because again, your interest is in getting your PPP application into the SBA E-Trans system as fast as possible, and whichever bank can do that would be the bank that presumably you'd want to use. There are also some other options outside of Hawaii that we don't know much about, but we know they are accepting, such as PayPal and other fintechs that are accepting PPP applications. We don't know how deep their lines are. We don't know how long it's expected for them to, move through their entire line and get to a new application submitted now, but it's another option for you. Our estimate in terms of how fast the new money will go, which is $310 billion, based on the rate that the money went in the last 24 hours of the last round, we think that it will be something less than 72 hours. So our best guess, and it really is a guess at this point, but our best guess would be our banks have somewhere in the range of 2 to maybe 3 days total to get as many loans pumped through the SBA E-Trans system as possible. So again, you want to have a perfect application so that whatever bank is going to submit it for you, that it goes through quickly and smoothly. And to the extent that some of the banks are up and running and have a chance to get your application into the SBA E-Trans system, you may want to consider going to another bank if your first bank didn't process the first time around. I should make clear that that is not an opinion that is held by the SBA. That is a personal thought. In terms of when we think the new money will go up and E-Tran will open back up, it's reported in the news that the House will likely pass this legislation on somewhere around Thursday. And it is unclear whether there will be a few days or literally minutes from the point that the president signs it to when SBA E-Tran opens back up. So again, the banks are definitely ready, but you folks, you want to be ready to have your applications in and ready to go. So we'll switch gears now to those of you who have PPP loans and some of the questions that we've been getting. We'll hit a few of them before we go to this Q&A, and then we'll go to the Q&A. So the first one relates to something that we are seeing pop up over and over and over and over, which is a strategy saying to use the funds after June 30th, to withhold some of the funds in the period before June 30th and to use them after. I certainly have some thoughts on that I've shared before, but I'll actually pass it to Jeff Harris to provide his thoughts on the legality of using PPP funds beyond June 30th, and then I'll comment after Jeff.
Thanks, Darren. Darren, the statute itself limits allowable uses to specific expenses incurred and paid before June 30th. So under a clear reading of the statute, we see no real permission to use the loan for anything after June 30th. We're aware of the opinion that you may be able to hold some of that money and get it at the 1% or 4% interest rate provided in the statute over the next 2 or 10 years. But we think that's a risky move now. There may be some further clarification either by SBA internally or in the upcoming regulations that allow that strategy. But as it stands now, you should plan on obtaining the maximum forgiveness you can on your loan and then returning the balance of it to the bank at the end of the 8-week period. Darren, that's all I have.
Yeah, I would pile on to that with essentially a legal response and also a practical one. So on the legal one, to what Jeff has said, the allowable uses section of the statute has a covered period that relates to that section of the statute. So the covered period ends June 30th and says you can do all these things, payroll costs, rent, etc., that you can use the money prior to June 30th. The only allowable use of that money under the statute is during that covered period. So the statute has no piece in it that says you are allowed to use the money for payroll costs or anything else after June 30th. I mean, the caveat is that SBA and Treasury rules have been fairly liberal to date, but until there is one that says you could use the money after June 30th, I think, particularly in light of the certifications that are signed by the borrower and the very severe penalties that can result from it, I think that's an extremely risky move. The second response is a practical one. So if you use the money for the 75% payroll costs, 25% non-payroll costs in the 8 weeks, do all the correct things, you're entitled to 100% forgiveness. And just assume in this example, say that payroll cost is essentially wasted on underutilized employees, but you still get the benefit of that 25% of your loan proceeds for rent, etc. So if you use the money in that 8 weeks for those purposes, and just assume for the purposes of this example that you have $100, you get a $25 benefit. If you were to wait after June 30th and treat this money as some kind of just 1% loan, again, setting aside the legality, which we believe is not legal, you use it as a loan. What you're comparing it to that point is the benefit of that low interest rate. And you can get another loan, whether it be Main Street at 4% or what have you. So assuming you could get another loan after June 30th for, say, somewhere in the range of 4%, the benefit you're getting is money that you can use at 1%. So the benefit is a 3% benefit. So what you're comparing, again, on this $100 loan is a $25 benefit now versus a $3 benefit later. So even if this particular strategy was legal, to me, it does not make sense economically because you're giving up a $25 benefit now for a $3 benefit later. So, I mean, we've addressed this a couple of times now, but we wanted to address it again. I'll move on to another clarification that's come up, which is for unemployment. There's a question of, in order for a person to get the $600 federal piece of unemployment, what are the requirements? Are there more restrictive requirements than just meeting the test under state law to get any unemployment at all? So I'll pass that one to Jeff.
The employee needs to be available for work in order to receive the state unemployment benefit and the corresponding federal emergency unemployment benefit. If the employee isn't available for work because they've rejected an offer to return to work, then they're not eligible for either of those benefits. And I have an add-on there that maybe Stacy can explain a little bit further, and that's when you leave someone on unemployment, we already know that the reserve fund for our calculating our unemployment insurance contributions next year is going to be quite a bit larger. But the more of your employees that you leave on unemployment, the higher your experience rated contribution is going to be, up to 6.4% of your wages based on the people you leave on unemployment. Thanks, Darren.
Stacy, do you want to comment on that?
No, I think he covered everything that I wanted to say about the SUDA rate potentially going up. And I just wanted to reiterate too that it is the employer's obligation to report to the DOIR that you've offered an employee their job back. And if you don't do that, you risk the employee being paid, you risk the employee depleting your reserves even further.
Yeah. Stacy, switching gears a little bit, there's a question that is getting pushed up relating to the status of EIDL funds, including both the advances and the loans, and what the current status of EIDL is. Can you address that?
Sure. So Jane started off the webinar today announcing that with the new bill that should be passing later this week, the EIDL loans will be reappropriated at $50 million, I believe, and the EIDL advances will be the appropriation will be increased by $10 billion. And I think that the only other thing I wanted to add was that we've been hearing anecdotally that the EIDL advances have started to fund, and they're about a 3-week waiting period right now. So if you put in your application at around March 30th to 31st, you probably have been seeing the deposits hit your account this week. And I've also heard that a lot of times you'll just have to check your bank account because the deposits are coming without notification by email. And so the next step would be, I think, then to wait. We've also seen some people getting contacted directly by the SBA, somebody at the SBA, to reach out to whoever was, the email was listed on the application to start the process of negotiating your loan amount and terms.
Thank you, Stacy. So going to some of these questions now, the first one is a two-parter that's at the top of the list. And it is a question about whether you can prepay expenses like rent that might be due outside of the 8 weeks. I'll actually expand on this question because I think it relates to the costs incurred and payments made section. So this takes a number of forms. One would be for costs that are incurred before the 8-week period. So for example, if employees work in the week prior to the 8 weeks of the forgiveness, but you pay that payroll out within the 8 weeks, that would be one situation. And another situation would be these kind of prepayment of rent situations, like can you pay rent in the 8-week period if it's going off into the future and beyond the 8 weeks. Stacy, what is your thought on that?
So I'll answer that in a couple of different ways and not directly first. But in the last interim final rule, there was a calculation that they gave about the maximum amount that you can pay payroll to an employee, and that was $100,000. And they clearly calculated that $15,385, I believe, and that's strictly an 8-week accrual period, because that equates to $100,000 divided by 52 times 8. So it's strictly an 8-week accrual period. So while they haven't given definitive guidance to what the costs incurred and payments made, it would appear that the intent is just to include 8 weeks. Having said that, however, I think we still really need some clarification on what costs incurred and payments made is, especially with respect to the rent component, because I believe the intent of the Paycheck Protection Program in allowing you to use 25% of the proceeds on other uses other than payroll was, I believe that the intent might have been to allow for people who haven't been able to pay their rent because they shut down to catch up on back rent payments. So that is something that we are really, really keeping an eye on, and we hope that by the time the final regulations are issued, I believe it should be on or before the 26th of April, that will be cleared up.
Yeah, I mean, we really could use some regulations on that particular issue. We really could use some regulations on what a full-time equivalent is on forgiveness. Those are probably the two biggest ones. I know that Jeff probably has the most conservative view of the three of us on this issue of costs incurred and payments made. But Jeff, do you want to give your thoughts on that?
Dollar question is those retirement benefits that were accrued. The cost was accrued based on hours worked in 2019, and the employer isn't required to make those contributions based on the hours worked in 2019 until they file their tax return, as late as well. Many employers wait until September of this year to make those contributions. And I don't think it's clear that retirement benefits that are incurred during the 8-week period and paid during the 8-week period can be easily stretched to cover that situation. It would be good to have some additional guidance, but that's probably the broadest stretch. Do we really think that those PPP loan funds should be used for amounts that were essentially earned in 2019 and typically won't be paid till September 2020? The conservative advice is don't cover them yet, wait for the additional guidance. The additional guidance is necessarily going to have to cover this sort of language.
Yeah, I think the practical point that comes out of what we're describing as essentially ambiguity is the one thing we know for sure is that if the costs are both incurred and paid within the 8-week period, they're going to count. So that means if the first week of that 8-week, whatever the employees work, and if they're also paid within that period of time, then that's going to count. So, we will get clarification. We are pretty confident. And so starting sort of off right now, we're going to get a week or two in of using PPP funds. I think the practice pointer is to get everyone on full payroll, because if you project out, that full payroll is going to be at the end of that 8 weeks, about 75%. You want to get them rolling now so that you are on track to use the full amount of forgiveness.
And Darren,
okay, go ahead.
Darren, can I add one other thing?
Sure.
I think the important thing to do now is think about being very conservative until those regulations come out. Document in a memo to file or even a board resolution the expenses within the 8-week period that you can clearly pay now. And then if the regulation opens up the period to cover the retirement plan example that I had, or the rent before or after the 8-week period that Stacy had, or the payroll spanning the start of the 8-week period that Darren had, that we should get an answer to all of those one way or the other within the next week or so in final regulations. Just wait until you get a clear answer one way or the other before you spend the money, or plan to readjust your spending, your allocations out of that separate account you should probably be keeping with all those PP funds in it, so that at the end of the 8 weeks, you only have allowable expenses.
Yeah, the next question is somewhat related. Next question at the top of the chain, which is bonuses. Again, I think the practice pointer here, before I address some of the ambiguity, the practice pointer here is if a bonus is going to be allowed, then we probably want to get the guidance on regulations first. So, save it, pay regular wages at 100% now, but wait till toward the end on the bonus question. So with respect to bonuses, let me pass this to Stacy, and then I'll give a couple of thoughts on whether bonuses within the 8-week period are allowed. Go ahead, Stacy.
Well, I do believe that bonuses are allowed. I think it should not, in no means, do you want to pay a bonus that would allow an employee to exceed the 15,385 mark of compensation during the 8-week period. I also do think that you should make sure that the bonuses are earned, so that you're tying the bonus to something that that you actually did, rather than just paying the bonus out to the employee.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the reason why I would agree is that for a number of you, if you pay 100% staff, 100% wages, for a number of you, you'll fall short of the 75% by about half to 1%. So there'll be extra money that is supposed to be going to payroll costs. There'll be extra money left over. And that suggests to me that the intent is to, to be able to use a full 75%. So the only way to do it at that point would be either to pay a bonus or to hire another person. The next question at the top of the chain actually looks like very similar to the last one. Yeah, I mean, the next question is the other unanswered one that we're getting over and over, which is how to deal with the FTE calculation in light of the fact that we don't have regulations, at least for another few days, on telling us what the average monthly headcount we'll have to keep is in order to, not have the forgiveness reduced. Jeff or Stacy, why don't we pass this to Stacy? Do you have any particular thoughts on that?
Sure. I think in absence of any guidance, I think for planning purposes, a lot of you are trying to plan on how much staff to bring back. I do think the best rule of thumb is probably to use it 30 hours a week is what I think a lot of people are relying on, just because it will yield the most conservative result when you look at the number of hours divided by 30.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, we're probably going to be facing either an hours-based definition of full-time equivalent, or some kind of combination of like a head count plus hours. So, the first clear guidance piece is you want to pick the look back period that is the lower number. Okay, so there's no question about that. So January or February of this year is one look back period in terms of figuring out what your, how many hours did you pay out to employees during that period of time. And the other look back period is February 15th to June 20th of last year. So figure out which one is the lower headcount number, because that's the one that it will be your benchmark. And then, Stacy's advice, I think, going from there. Next one is well, let me take the next one in a broader fashion. The question is whether trash pickup is considered a utility, but is a question about the definition of utilities generally. Why don't we pass that to Stacy?
So I believe the definition of utilities is your typical, telephone, electricity, gas, water, sewer, internet, and they have a term in there called transportation utilities, and the only reference to transportation utilities or example that we've seen is in the interim final rule, which identified gas as a transportation utility. I've had questions about, can we use our IT service provider, not your internet service provider, but your IT consultants? And I would think that's not the spirit of the rule.
Yeah. Okay. Next question actually comes up a fair amount, which is the $100,000 cap on employee compensation. And sort of to go backwards a little bit, Stacy had mentioned a $15,385 number. What she's referring to is if you have someone who has the highest compensation allowed, which is $100,000 per year toward the PPP, that rate at 8 weeks, so if you take $100,000, you divide by 52, which is 52 weeks, and then you multiply by 8 to get what the rate is for 8 weeks, that comes out to 15,385 and change. So that's where that number comes from. And the question is, for a particular individual, who's been counted toward payroll costs, can you exceed that number? Here, there's a difference between employees and owners. Again, either Jeff or Stacy, if you want. Jeff looks like he's answering written questions. Stacy, do you want to take this one?
And the question was, it's different between employees and owners. So the employee clearly will get a salary, and that salary is capped to the 15,385 number. The owner's compensation, it depends on what kind of owner you are. If you are a shareholder in an S corporation, you are most likely on payroll, so you would be subject to that same cap. If you're a self-employed individual, it's a cap on your net self-employment income. So whatever you've reported on your Schedule C, not to exceed $100,000 a year. I wanted to also throw in there that the new interim final rule did specify that owners' health insurance benefits or retirement benefits are not included as a payroll cost. That has also come up a lot. I'm not sure why they excluded it, but it is excluded from the definition of payroll costs.
Up above 100,000, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the most recent or second interim final rule had a lot of rules in it geared toward owners, whether they be LLC members or other folks of that nature, or sole proprietors. And what they're trying to address is this issue that they're not on W-2 compensation. So you're talking about essentially net profit for those people. And the rules that were just issued are really geared toward trying to avoid gaming the system. So some of the rules that they rolled out for owners are things like, if you didn't have retirement in 2019, you're not allowed to all of a sudden start a retirement account now and count it toward PPP. Or if you didn't pay for your own health insurance last year, you're not allowed to do that now. The other restriction that Stacy mentioned is, because it's net profit, they're not allowing you to go above that 15,385 threshold. So once you hit it, you hit it. Like, you can't use health insurance or retirement to get above that threshold for an owner. Alternatively, for an employee, even though they hit that cap on pure compensation, they hit that 15,385 number, you can actually tack on health insurance and retirement for those. Most of these are covered in either one of the two memos that we issued, the forgiveness memo in particular, and the memo for employers that is on, I think, version 14. Jeff or Stacy, did you have any particular issues? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm seeing a text come in. One thing that I did mean to address that we haven't addressed is these U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation grants. Okay, so the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation had put up these $5,000 grants, and let us be really clear about this. We are a group of friends who decided to just try and get the word out about first the CARES Act, and then it's turned into, if there are other programs that might help Hawaii businesses, we publicize the word. Let me be very clear that we do not control any of these programs. We are solely here to interpret them and try and help you through them. So That $5,000 grant was published and publicized. It went live, I think, was it yesterday? And from what we have heard, the demand for those, as with PPP, was overwhelming. It crashed their system, and they got so many applications in that they've now closed it. So we do know, I think, anecdotally, one person who got it. Hopefully there are others in Hawaii who got in and avoided the crash system. If there are, then please let us know. But those small business grants, we understand that they are gone, essentially.
Darren,
Go ahead, Jeff.
I do have one advertisement, and that is, if some of you agree that it's good to get your employees back to work, even though you don't have a full day's work for them, I have one favorite charity that has plenty of volunteer opportunities, and that's the Institute for Human Services. Connie Mitchell tells me there's plenty of volunteer opportunities out there to work in the shelter with masks, to do intake, to do many volunteer opportunities to help our state's homeless. And so that's just one example of the sort of creative things you could do to have your employees doing something other than sitting at home while you're paying them.
Yeah, and we rolled this idea out last Friday, and I'd like to dig into it a little further. So for context, for those of you who were not on that Friday webinar, there's $2 billion rolling into employers' hands essentially in the next week. And $1.5 billion of that money is essentially earmarked to pay employees. Okay, so you literally have an infusion of $1.5 billion going to employees that's going to cover the next 8 weeks or so. That is going to create an absolute glut of underutilized workers, particularly given, I think Jane had made mention at the very beginning that the stay-at-home order is being extended. So the question is, what can we do with those underutilized employees? And the idea that we rolled out was, well, there are volunteer types of things, community service types of things that can bring recognition, advertising, marketing to your particular business, while also synergistically doing a really good thing for the community. And some of the ideas that we talked about were delivery services, or helping, whether it's IHS or other organizations. The addition to that I think I'd want to mention is, you will want to make sure that if you are essentially expanding what you're doing to include these kinds of creative ideas, you want to make sure that's covered under your workers' compensation insurance. So in the event that, say, an employee were injured or something were to happen, that you would want to make sure that that liability is covered under your workers' compensation insurance. And then to the extent that the employees are driving for deliveries and that sort of thing, I think you'd want to make sure that there is automobile insurance that is current, that would cover those issues as well. So I think that's the add-on to what I had said last week. Stacy, anything to add on top of that?
I did want to address something else that I just saw kind of pop up in the Q&A. Just logistically, I think using the 8-week period in consideration of the new appropriation that is probably going to be passed by Thursday or Friday this week. We, again, at the beginning of the hour, I think we said that, or Darren had mentioned that the rate at which the funds had been going out in the last couple of days was approximately $100 million a day. So in all likelihood, the funds will be gone within the first 72 hours after it's approved. So maybe by early next week. The SBA has 10 days, or the SBA has provided guidance that once the money has been approved, the banks have 10 days to get it into your account. So mathematically, that should work out to where you have 8 weeks. You have 8 weeks to use the funds. You might be short a couple of days though, but. There has, and everything that we've seen in the new law that is being sent to the House, it looks to be a clean bill with no extension of time, unfortunately, for that June 30th window.
Yeah, this is a sort of interesting issue that is now coming to a head, which is a number of you are going to be funded in May. And so, I mean, I think we've even seen some indication that loans that made it in the first round, that certain banks are telling their customers that they're going to fund them in May. So if you get it in May, your 8 weeks will run before June 30th. Yeah, as a matter of what the statute says, that essentially shortens your 8 week period until and unless SBA or Treasury says otherwise. We think there's a good chance they might say otherwise, but until that time, the statute is pretty clear. So the later you get the money, the shorter your period of time to use it. I see a number of questions on, again, on this owner compensation issue, whether it's LLC members or sole proprietors, or what's described as independent contractors, partners, etc. Stacy, do you want to cover that, and then maybe I'll tack on a few thoughts?
There's something specifically.
Yeah, I mean, first question is, are owner draws an allowable use, which I think can be pretty quickly answered. Yeah.
Up into the $100,000 maximum.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I'd go back to the earlier things I said, but if you are including owner compensation, or you are a sole proprietor or LLC member, that sort of thing, I would highly recommend going to the Treasury website and pulling up the most recent interim final rule. So what you would do is go to, I think, home.treasury.gov or home.treasury.gov, or if you just Google U.S. Treasury, you'll get to their webpage. At the top of their webpage is a little red hyperlink that talks about COVID. You click on that hyperlink, and then on the next page, there will be a bunch of links to all of the regulations and Q&As and resources that have been issued. So in that list is the essentially the second issued interim final rule. And that interim final rule has a lot in it that addresses owners and has examples and has kind of worksheet type of information in there. But again, the highlights that come out of that are for owners, you're capped in terms of the amount that you're allowed to use. You're capped at this $15,385 number, because that is the prorated $100,000. You're also limited to using the money for permissible uses that you used last year. So you can't make a new retirement account that you didn't have last year. You can't make, get health insurance that you didn't have last year. That sort of thing. So take a look there for that. Let me see if there's anything else pressing. Otherwise, I'm inclined not to hold all of you guys on the line. Any final comments, Jeff or Stacy, before I make some sort of final comments?
Just on the June 30th issue, Darren, because I'm seeing a number of questions on that. I think it's the clear statute is, the clear statute says allowable uses end June 30th. There are a number of people that want it otherwise. We want it otherwise. It would be good if Treasury clarified it otherwise, but I don't think you can bank on grabbing that money, not using it during the applicable period, and thinking you just get a loan on July 1 at 1%. We need some further clarification on that.
Stacy.
I think the only thing I want to say, and I think it's just worth repeating. I think a part of what we're trying to encourage everyone to do here is, if you have not yet applied for the PPP loan, the funds are going to go very fast. And so if you are on the fence thinking, sitting there thinking about it, I would encourage you to get in line at a bank as soon as possible. I think the other thing that Darren touched upon in the beginning of the hour is, if you are waiting on an application, if the reason why you don't have your PPP funds yet is because your bank has not yet submitted your application to the SBA portal, if you aren't able to get anywhere, with inquiring on the status of your loan, I think contrary to what we had been saying before and just applying at one bank, I think you should really reconsider that and take your application to the bank that you think your application has the most chances of succeeding.
Yeah, I'll layer onto that. And again, making very clear that these views expressed are not the views of the SBA, which is the way we understand, at least the information that has been floating around, the way we understand the SBA E-Trans system to work is that if an FEIN is entered into that system by whatever lending institution it is, it will thereafter lock out everyone else. So it's first in wins. That means that if there were multiple applications pending and the first one gets into the system by whatever bank got it in fast, the other banks, if they try to enter it in, will not be successful. So with that, let me make some final announcements. We're actually changing the time for Friday's webinar because we've been typically doing this at 2 o'clock. Our next webinar is going to be on Friday at 10 o'clock a.m. Senator Brian Schatz, it looks like, just confirmed that he will be joining us to talk about the new round of funding. Buddy will post a link that you can register and share. Yeah. And sorry, the chat keeps moving on me. Also, Evan and Beth Ann Kozlovich and Trisha Kajimura from Kahimohala and Coco launched a video support series to help us move past anxiety and clarity with licensed therapists and coaches. And Buddy will post the link for that as well. As always, we will continue to update our memos that are on the public Google Drive, particularly if and when there is actual guidance on from the SBA and Treasury on the forgiveness rules. Thank you to everyone again. I know it's a high stress time. Please be patient with us. We're putting out as much effort as we can. We are a group of volunteers. So if we can help you, we are trying, but please show some patience. With that, thank you to everyone, and we hope you guys have a great week. And for some of you, we will see you on Friday at 10 a.m. Thanks so much.